Hello, everyone. My name is Mirsad Kriještorac, and I'm joining you from South Florida in the United States. I'm senior researcher at Bratislava-based Minority Issues Research Institute, also known by its acronym MIRI. Our MIRI is dedicated on working towards promoting and protecting human rights and minority rights in Slovakia and abroad. We believe in the importance of research, education, and active involvement in shaping a more just society. As a part of our activities, we hold monthly conversations with experts and people around the world about important world affairs. As a host for today's conversation, I'm going to briefly introduce the topic and then let our today's guests take over. As former Yugoslavia collapsed in 1992, Serbian troops began military aggression against Bosnia and Herzegovina in order to occupy it and murder as many of Bosnian indigenous Muslim Bosniak people there. That war of aggression against Bosnia ended in 1995, when also some of the worst crimes and mass murder of Bosniaks was carried on. This year marks 30 years since Serbian militiamen, literally previously blessed by their priests and bishops, begin murdering more than 8,372 Muslim men and boys in the United Nations declared safe zone of Srebrenica and Jepa in eastern Bosnia, slaughtering them in cold blood without mercy for several weeks. After the takeover of the towns, the Serb soldiers converged on the very UN compound protected by 2 battalions of Netherlands peacekeeping troops, where some of 15,000 Bosniaks had fled in search for promised safety. Although protection of the United Nations declared safe zones of Srebrenica and Jepa was promised, the Netherlands soldiers just stood down and did nothing to protect all those civilians. Not a single shot was fired by them. Instead, they actually assisted the Serb troops to separate some 2,000 boys and men from their mothers and sisters and wives in the compound and forced them out of the United Nations compound into the Serbian military hands. The Serbian troops proceeded to torture and murder those boys and men and then bury them in mass graves, which are still being uncovered. The girls and women, the Dutch and Serb soldiers together loaded into trucks and hauled them to first Serb-governed camps and then eventually transported them to the Bosnian government-held areas. With those crimes, Srebrenica became the city of the largest organized mass extermination of people in Europe since the World War II. At the time of 1995, Netherlands and other European governments, as well as some media, excused the complicity of the Netherlands peacekeepers by claiming they were outgunned, so they could not do anything to protect those who they were tasked to protect. But in 2006, this oversight was changed as the Netherlands government duly awarded the peacekeeping battalions medals of commendation for their heroism in not intervening to save the fleeing and defenseless Bosniak civilians. A tide of all kinds of right-wing parties across Europe rose up boldly to cheer the ceremony and embrace Srebrenica genocide as a new rallying call. At the same time, Srebrenica genocide denial among Serbs and others continuously is being propagated, indicating the intention by the aggressors to continue and possibly repeat the crimes when new chances arise. As our effort to combat that genocide denial and remind everyone about the future or about the failure of the world to protect all those people, MIRI is hosting this event with our today's guests, who are active participants in investigations of those crimes, which subsequently ended in the conviction by the United Nations Security Council established International Tribunal of dozens of top Serbian political and military leaders for various crimes against humanity, including genocide. Last year, the United Nations General Assembly also adopted the Srebrenica Genocide Resolution designating July 11 as the International Day of Reflection and Commemoration of the Bosniak Muslim victims of that genocide. And witnessing, which we're going to do today, is an important step in that effort to stop abuses of human rights, and that is what we are going to do with our event, to reflect and provide more accurate information and resources about Srebrenica genocide so that people can learn more about it. So today, 30 years later, during the same month of April, when Srebrenica and Žepa were declared United Nations safe zones in 1993 and promised by the world to be protected, but they were not, we are going to reflect on those horrendous events and recall events and elaborate on details and lessons learned, hopefully to highlight the importance of international cooperation in protection of human rights and dignity of people everywhere. We adopt that to be the lesson we learned from Holocaust, but we obviously have to repeat it until that sets in. Since the town of Srebrenica, as I mentioned, was declared a U.S. safe zone in April, we are basically holding this event in April of 2025, 30 years later. Today's guests are Mr. Robert McNeil. He's the author of the book Grave Faces, a forensic technician story of gathering evidence of genocide in Bosnia, detailing his experiences while gathering evidence of war crimes and genocide in Bosnia and Kosovo. From 1996 until 2009, Mr. McNeil was invited to be part of national, international forensic teams who worked with providing physical and scientific evidence of terrorist attacks in UK and Ireland, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide in war zones in the Balkans and in Africa. But as he said, he was shocked, although he has quite a long experience working as a forensic technician, he was shocked by what he saw in Bosnia. For his work, Mr. McNeil was awarded in 1999 the British MBE Medal for Service to Pathology by Prince Charles in Buckingham Palace. He's now a global ambassador for Remembering Srebrenica. The very special guest that we are honored to have today is also Mr. Hasan Nuhanović, who is joining us from Bosnia, as I understand. Right, he was an interpreter for the United Nations in Srebrenica and saw his family murdered when the town fell to the Bosnian Serb army. In the years since, he has campaigned for justice for the victims of Srebrenica, using various means to honor the victims and uphold the truth about Srebrenica genocide. He's the author of 2 books under the UN flag, The International Community and the Srebrenica Genocide, published in 2007, and The Last Refuge, a true story of war, survival, and life under siege in Srebrenica, published in 2019. Finally, the moderator for today's conversation will be Dr. Najla Hrustanović. She's a clinical director and core faculty member in the Counselor Education Supervision doctoral program at the Antioch University. She was born in Srebrenica, and like many other people from Bosnia, she is our hero and a genocide survivor. Her professional work has been dedicated to raising awareness around refugee experiences and inspiring global efforts for humanity. As a clinician, she has been practicing in the field for several years, both in the community mental health and currently in her own private practice, focusing on refugees, immigrants, and low-income population. Her teaching prepares counselors to become educators and embrace leadership roles that advocates for refugees in various capacities. Her research and scholarly works centers on trauma, healing, and promoting resilient narratives within refugee communities. Finally, to repeat the code of conduct for our events, as usual, for this type of seminars, we are going to first hear the presenters, and after that, we will open the discussion for the questions and answers. If you want to ask a question in person, please raise the hand icon and we'll call upon you. Once your microphone is on, please introduce yourself and tell us where you are joining us from, and then ask your question. Those of you who cannot join over the microphone, you are welcome to type in your question in the chat box, and we'll try to ask them on your behalf. And before we have Dr. Najla take over, I would like us to just see briefly a poem that is essentially in the beginning of Mr. McNeil's book, and it will kind of set the tone for our discussion for today.
Srebrenica Jigsaw. For Robert McNeil, after hearing him talk at Portobello Book Festival, Edinburgh, on October the 5th, 2014, about his work in Srebrenica after the massacre there in July 1995. Imagine it this way. This way there's no blood, no fragments of flesh or bone or clothes, no stench, no maggots. A life-size jigsaw of a photograph of a happy man or healthy youth or grinning kid. A monster stamps on the box, scatters the crushed pieces over the ground, urinates and defecates on them, digs a hole and buries the bits. Then returns sometime later, digs up the pieces, takes them away, buries the bits in different holes. Months, years perhaps pass. We are asked to dig them up again, clean them, try to fit the broken pieces back together, search for what's left of the hand that waved, knowing we will find no trace of that smiling face. Now, multiply the image by 8,000. Daniel Harvey.
Dr. Najla, please take over.
Thank you, Dr. Mirsad, for setting up the foundation for us today and providing the important historical and current context for our discussion. We also thank the entire Minority Issues Research Institute for organizing this event and allowing us space, as you said, to witness and reflect and honor. Greetings to you all, and we thank you for joining us today. As Dr. Mirsad shared in our introductions, my name is Dr. Najla Hrustanović, and I am pleased to help facilitate our discussion here today. I join you from the state of Connecticut in the United States as well. As Dr. Mirsad mentioned, my connection to the event today is as personal as it gets, I would say, but also professional. He shared some of my professional endeavors in terms of working with refugee populations and from my mental health counseling field, working to help people who have undergone such trauma. We welcome you to this important and solemn seminar marking 30 years since the Srebrenica Genocide. Today, we gather not only to honor the memory of more than 8,372 Bosniak men, boys, women, and girls who were brutally murdered in July 1995, but also to reflect on the lasting impact of this atrocity and our collective responsibility to remember, educate, and speak the truth. This webinar focuses on two vital themes. This will be part of our conversation moving forward: the ongoing challenge of genocide denial and the importance of having accessible, responsible educational resources for those who seek to learn more about Srebrenica. In a world where memory is often contested and history politicized, we believe that commemoration must be rooted in fact, empathy, and a commitment to justice. We are deeply grateful to our panelists today and all of you as our participants in conversation for contributing to this necessary discussion, and we invite all of you to engage with open minds and hearts as we reflect, witness, and honor together. So to get us started, just briefly before we jump right into some of our questions for today, I would like to again have our panelists just briefly introduce themselves and perhaps share something personal that was not already shared, how they are connected personally or maybe more specifically professionally to this subject. So whatever you would like to share from your perspective in your introduction, here's the time. And I'll throw it over to maybe Robert McNeil to get us started.
Hello, Dr. Najla, and thank you. It's an honor to speak to you and to the Institute guests. And so I'll try and be as brief as possible. My connection with Bosnia came in beginning in 1995 when Physicians for Human Rights, an American-based charity, were asked by the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia to contact forensic experts and departments throughout the world, really, to ask for volunteers because disturbed earth had been found through aerial photography around the Srebrenica area. And so they were looking for people to go out there and investigate because of the over 8,000 men and boys that were reported missing. And so I was contacted in my capacity as a technician. I should say that I had worked for almost 30 years as a pathology technician in Scotland, and my job there was to assist pathologists in ascertaining causes of death of people who died, mainly from natural causes, but also from suicide, murder, and every other medical negligence and other types of deaths. And so another role I had was dealing with the bereaved and helping them answer questions. So I then volunteered to go out to Bosnia, but we had to wait until the first of the graves were secure, and the exhumation started. So it was in 1996, early 1996, when I first went out there and joined the first team of international forensic specialists that included anthropologists, pathologists, a radiographer, police personnel, and 4 pathologists. And so and I thought that I would be able to deal with the work quite easily after having such a long career in dealing with death. However, Bosnia was on an entirely different level because we were first shown to a temporary mortuary in Kriještorac, which had been established. It was a bombed out factory. And there we had to try and establish protocols and workflows for dealing with the victims' bodies from the first grave we had to deal with, which was in Srebrenica, where over 150 victims were believed to be in that grave. And so we started the work. We were soon overwhelmed, however, by the sheer numbers. The conditions in the mortuary were pretty grim. And, for example, there was no running water, electricity was sparse. So it got to the point where we were overwhelmed with bodies. There was pressure on the team to work faster, but I should stress that the forensic experts that went out to Bosnia, not just in '96, but right up until ICTY shut down, were all experts in their own field. The pathologists in particular would know from their own experience that these crimes may well come to court level where their evidence would be challenged. And in the case in Bosnia, we assumed that the defence teams would have some of the most experienced barristers, lawyers to challenge that evidence. And so I'm pleased to say, in a way, that they refused to compromise in the meticulous examinations of the victims' bodies. And so following that, 1996, I returned home later that year. And as well as the shock of the work, I felt, as some of the others did, that we hadn't completed the job. It was there was still so much work to do. I put in a report pointing out some of the requirements that might be needed, because it was all been done in a shoestring, and we needed a lot more equipment. Anyway, the result of that was that in 1997, the UN decided that instead of using temporary mortuaries close to the grave sites, they would build a central mortuary in the town of Visoko, because by then more and more graves were being discovered throughout the entire country, and so instead of us going to the grave sites, the bodies would be exhumed by the exhumation teams and sent by refrigerated container trucks to this mortuary in Visoko, and so we carried on the work there. Srebrenica was, to begin with, was the priority, but priorities changed quite often. In 97, the UN had arrested a camp commander from Luka concentration camp who they wanted to gather evidence on, and so Srebrenica was put on hold. Shortly after that, helicopter crashed containing NATO officials, and that seemed to be a priority. And once again, I left frustrated because we hadn't completed the work. So anyway, to cut a long story short, I returned every year after that until the mid-2000s, and gathering evidence and trying as far as possible to provide as much information about identifying the victims' bodies. But our main priority was to gather evidence against the accused, the perpetrators. So, and that was until ICMP, that's the International Commission in Missing Persons, came into being, and they took over the identification. And I must say, albeit through very hard work, have managed to be able to identify many of the bodies. One last thing that I will say, though, that's important, I think, is that by 1998-99, it became clear that some of the mass graves that hadn't been secured had been emptied, and that the Serbs had removed the bodies and torn them apart and buried them in many secondary graves in much more difficult places to hide. And the effect that that had on the families, was just unbelievable, as if they hadn't gone through enough to learn that their loved ones' bodies had been desecrated in that way. And of course, as was said at the beginning, bodies and body parts are still being found to this day. I'll pass you on to you, Dr. Najla.
Thank you so much, Robert. I would like to invite Dr. Mirsad and Hasan as well into anything you'd like to share about your introduction before we get into our first question. Hasan, I think you're muted if you're trying to speak.
I thought it was in your control, not in my control. Okay, thank you. What Robert just explained, is something that reminds me a lot about the experience I went through at about the same time when Robert was there in Bosnia doing his professional work. That was very much appreciated by the survivors, by the mothers who have lost their sons and other relatives of the victims. And I'm quite familiar with what Robert or Mr. McNeil and his colleagues did. I remember the time when the Physicians for Human Rights were actually more or less the first team of professionals that started collecting the evidence. And I remember it was the ante-mortem database, as far as I remember, that they came up with. But anyway, the work of these forensic pathologists and other professionals who did this work over decades, exhuming the mortal remains and working on identification of the mortal remains is one of the most important things that happens in Bosnia after the Srebrenica Genocide. Without this, and without the introduction of a DNA identification technique, I believe, and I think most people familiar with the problem would agree, I believe that today we wouldn't have more than several hundred maximum victims remains identified to this day. So the fact that we do have more than 6,700 individuals whose remains, partial remains, in some cases it's just a single bone or a skull or a part of a skeleton. However, more than 6,700 individuals, victims of the Srebrenica July 95 genocide, have been buried at Potocari Memorial Center, and it was only thanks to the Physicians for Human Rights and then the ICMP that continued with this work, and others who were involved, including some teams from the International Tribunal in The Hague, and some other forensic teams that have joined them. Only thanks to them do we have these identified remains that could be buried at Potocari, where the family members, where the mothers of the victims are now able to at least visit and do a prayer and do this kind of ritual or whatever the family members feel they should do at the graveyard in Potocari. And I remember that up until that point, Srebrenica Genocide as a mass murder, a crime of mass murder, was probably the first such crime in human history in which such resources have been invested. Again, thanks to the DNA, the development of a DNA identification technology, without which this would have been absolutely impossible. And I did my PhD thesis partially on this subject 3 years ago, regarding the problem of the missing persons after the ethnic cleansing and genocide in Srebrenica and Prijedor, which means eastern and western Bosnia, where some of the most horrendous crimes were perpetrated in Bosnia and Herzegovina between 92 and 95. As Mirsad mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, there are some young people, or many of them, especially young people in not only in the United States but in Europe and in Bosnia as well, who actually simply do not remember these events. Some of them were actually born after 95 or during the war or at the end of the 90s, and they don't remember the history. And Mirsad has already in his introduction laid out some of the most important historical facts pertaining to the events of July 95. I will just say a few sentences with regards to my own history. I live in Sarajevo for the last 20 plus years. I work for the Srebrenica Memorial that was established some 2 decades ago, 17 years ago, and I was one of those, members of a small group of survivors who had been pushing the local authorities and the international community to actually, help us, assist us, provide us with assistance, support, and political support and other kind of support, which was absolutely required and necessary some 17-20 years ago, that we needed in order to establish a memorial on the territory at which these crimes were perpetrated, where the site itself is populated, by, not, of course, not all of the population has been involved in the war crime, but there are many members among the population living there right now who are actually involved in the crimes that we are talking about. So it was an extremely difficult endeavor, and it took years before the Memorial Center was finally established, and it exists today. It is quite known, I think, among many similar memorials in the world, but it still exists in a place, a part of Bosnia that is, politically hostile to the very idea of behind the existence of this memorial. I lost my parents. Oh, we always have a problem using the word lost and missing, which we often try to, underline. But, both my parents and my brother, who was 6 years younger than me, were killed in July 95. Mirsad mentioned the event in his introduction. It happened on 13 July when the members of the UN Dutch battalion, as well as other international UN staff present, including some British, for example, present on the site, were involved in the act of handing over thousands of Bosniak men, women, and children to the hands of the Serb soldiers and police, who were there in Potocari waiting for these people to come out of the compound. These people should have stayed on the UN compound, and many of them would have been alive today. But the UN, which is probably an unprecedented event in the history since the UN was founded in 1948, since the day when the UN was founded and the peacekeeping missions, peacekeeping missions started at different locations in the world. So never has such an event happened in the history of the UN peacekeeping missions or United Nations as an organization. So that the UN peacekeepers themselves become directly involved and complicit in such a crime, which two international courts ruled was a genocide. So my parents and my brother were handed over to the Serbs by the UN peacekeepers in front of my eyes, and they were murdered, along with thousands of others. I've spent the last 30 years working on what we call the campaign for truth and justice, and I repeat, the two key words I would say are truth and justice. Truth and justice are the two key words that we've been fighting for all this time since 1995, or I would say since 1992, when the Bosnian genocide actually started. What happened in Srebrenica July 95 was actually the last episode of genocide perpetrated against the Bosnian Muslims, or Bosniaks, as we now have this term according to the Bosnian constitution. I prefer the term Bosniaks to the term Bosnian Muslims. That will be my introduction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hasan. We appreciate what you've shared on a personal level as well. Dr. Mirsad, anything else you'd like to add for yourself?
I appreciate so far what we heard, but I think it will be good if Hasan, if that's not too much of an issue for you, to also note how you yourself have pursued what you just said. You pursued the Dutch or Holland, Netherlands governments in courts for their complicity, and the courts have awarded you for essentially for that pursuit. I think that will also add another layer to the story. So it's not like Hasan is saying it, it's not like Mirsad is saying it, but the courts have consistently basically also confirmed not only genocide, but confirmed that the United Nations have also been, or rather the soldiers who were present at that time were also being complicit in that horrific crime of genocide that was committed in Srebrenica in July 1995.
Mirsad, if you actually meant that I should add a few pieces of information regarding that aspect of the case, I can do it right now. It was, I mean, I saw what happened. And I couldn't believe. I mean, nobody could believe what was happening in front of our eyes. I mean, it was not just the Serb soldiers and police that were standing there separating the men and the boys who were taken to the execution sites, and some of them killed on the spot. It was also the members of the UN protection forces, the UNPROFOR, that were involved. However, it would take years of hard work to try to get any sort of justice in the court of law, to actually have this sort of judicial confirmation, in a form of a judgment from a court, to confirm that this is a fact which should actually be recorded in history as such. Because until we had this sort of judgment from the court, it was denied by the Dutch government, it was denied by the United Nations, it was denied by everyone else who were involved in these events. France published its report, French government, in 2000, and there were very few lines with regards to these sort of events. I'm talking about the Potocari events of 11, 12, and 13 July. The International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia that indicted and tried 168 individuals with I don't know how many thousands of hours of trials in these courtrooms, have deliberately, it was very clear, have gone around these the investigators, the prosecutors, and the judges. They did their best to actually go around the fact that the UN was involved and that the Dutch were involved. I mean, the court was in The Hague, the capital of the Netherlands. So it would have been definitely very embarrassing for the Netherlands to have this sort of facts discussed in the court of law in their capital, and they probably managed to somehow block that from happening. And I don't think that the British government, the French government, or any other Western government were actually very much interested in these sort of facts being laid out in a court of law. So what happened was that when I realized that nobody is going to do that, I managed to somehow, start this court case by myself as one individual with a lawyer who was a Dutch, and she still is a Dutch lawyer. She's still there, and the two of us, with the assistance of some, NGOs, have managed to sue the state of the Netherlands, and only after 11 years, it took us 11 years to go through all these complicated procedures of the Dutch courts, from the lowest level all the way up to the Supreme Court of the Netherlands, which finally ruled that the state of the Netherlands was responsible for the deaths of at least some of these victims, at least some, including, for example, my father and my brother, while actually my mother was excluded from the judgment as a woman, which is another story which I don't want to talk about right now. So yes, what I was describing 10 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago, was actually confirmed in a judgment delivered by a Dutch court in the Netherlands, the Dutch National Court. As a result of that, recently, a procedure of compensation or reparations to the surviving family members was, I don't know if I can say successfully completed. I don't think it was successful really completely, but it was closed down anyway. The procedure was closed down. It lasted for several years, and 4,003, according to my information, which I've received from some of the official Dutch, from the officials in the Netherlands, 4,300 individuals, members of the victims, for whom the state of the Netherlands was declared responsible by this Dutch judgment of the Dutch court, were paid some symbolic financial reparations. I'm saying symbolic financial reparations, but still the state of the Netherlands paid, and I know the sum. The total sum paid was 22 million euros. That was the payment by the state of the Netherlands. So, it was proved in the court, and it was finally, after almost three decades, accepted by the state of the Netherlands as their own responsibility in the case of the Srebrenica Genocide. So I'll finish here. So the Srebrenica Genocide is not only about the Bosniaks as victims and the members of the Serb army and police. It is also about this sort of role played by the international community, United Nations, and countries such as those whose troops were on the ground, which is the Netherlands, UK, whose general was the commander of all troops in Bosnia while Srebrenica was happening. So it was the UK commander general, and it was a French general who was there while this was happening, who was in his cabinet in Zagreb, the capital of Croatia. So that's just part of the story.
Excellent. Well, we appreciate your persistence. This 11 years was very important because, as you said, it is a struggle for justice that is essentially guiding people who survived this to somehow, persevere through all this trauma. I feel traumatized just by listening to all these things, and I can only imagine how people like you feel. By the way, as we have said in the introduction, one of the important part of discussion is to point to all of you where you can find some additional resources. This is the website. I posted the link for the website in the chat. It's srebrenicamemorial.org, and it has a version in several languages. Finally, with the permission of Hasan, I will also post the link for that film, Quo Vadis Aida, which partly, not completely, but partly, depicts the story that Hasan described, and it was awarded the special award here in the United States. Was it 2 years ago, right? And it is a powerful film to see. And so I post that link here. Now, obviously, we are focusing on this this procedural part of how we establish the facts and the truths about Srebrenica genocide, and that's why I appreciate that Hasan shared this painful story for him, for sure, with us, essentially saying that even the Dutch courts in the end agreed that their troops were complicit in that whole story. But maybe we can also hear from Robert about how the International Tribunal worked to prove everything. And then after that, I will really leave it up to Dr. Najla. I apologize for jumping in.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mirsad. Well, as far as our involvement for the ICTY is concerned, I mentioned earlier that our main role was to gather evidence and try and keep the integrity of the evidence absolutely secure. And it's thanks to the police officers, mainly crime scene investigators, working with us to ensure that happened. And if I could just relate one incident where in the Kalisha mortuary in '96, we were ordered by the military to close down the mortuary because although the war was allegedly over, there was still sporadic fighting going on, and the team refused to leave the mortuary. My concern was for the bodies, and the police's concern was for the evidence, and so refused to leave until the evidence was secured and the mortuary secured by the American troops that were responsible in that area. But that's just to give you an example as to how meticulous and careful we all were in ensuring that the evidence gets to the court. It was the CSI's responsibility to get the evidence packaged up and delivered by hand to the International Criminal Tribunal court. And of course, that evidence would then be available to the defence in order for them to try and defend the accused. And there were a number of challenges of the evidence, and it was mainly the lead pathologists and lead anthropologists who would deliver the evidence. Myself, anyone could be called, and I was asked to appear in the court, but was never called to give evidence. But I did get the opportunity to listen to the cases as they went on, and I was actually very pleased, if that's the right word, that the integrity of the evidence that reached the courts was complete. And so, although there were challenges, those challenges were met very well by the expert witnesses, and so that's basically a very quick, brief report on the evidence journey from Bosnia to the Hague.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you all. As we are hearing here today, obviously from Hasan, your sharing, we are noting on a very significant topic of genocide denial and the process, Hasan, that you had to specifically go through to have truth validated, and what it takes for something like this to to end this way. So I'd like to move us into one of our questions for today, and from your own individual perspectives, from your work and or your experience, what do you think are the most common strategies or narratives used in Srebrenica genocide denial? How do these manifest today? How have you seen them manifest, both locally, more closely, or globally? And finally, what do you think? How does denial affect survivors?
Yeah. Again, yeah, that's one of the most complex questions that I think after every genocide, I think there were many genocides in human history, too many, and some are still happening right now today, and unfortunately that's a fact. And so when we conclude that a genocide happens, which it means it's over. It's over. However, the question is, what marks the end of genocide? When can we actually say that a genocide is over? Well, as I mentioned many times in my conversations with other people, was that when the last, victim was buried or dumped into a mass grave by the Serb nationalist, criminals? Was that when they moved the bodies from the primary to the secondary to the tertiary graves? Was that when finally the tertiary graves were, how do you say, disguised with a name to destroy the evidence of the crime? I mean, the bodies were scattered all over the place on a territory which is the size, let's say, 50 by 50 miles. I mean, Robert knows what I'm talking about. There's a territory, 50 by 50 miles, mid-Podrinje, eastern Bosnia, where the bodies were scattered all over the place, deliberately with an aim to destroy the evidence that this crime has actually happened. And then you have Gregory Stanton, one of the most renowned genocide scholars, who has defined these 9 or 10 stages of genocide. Some people say there's more, maybe 11. For example, my colleague Haris Halilović says there is 11 stages of genocide in Bosnia happening, maybe in other places as well, because as according to Gregory Stanton, the last stage of genocide is actually denial. But he also says that denial happens throughout all of the other stages of genocide, starting from stage 1 till the last stage. Denial is always there. It is there as the last stage when supposedly a genocide is over, but is a genocide over if we have a last stage of genocide? Is it still a genocide? That's a question. I mean, it can be a rhetorical question. It can be a practical question. It can be a question that I, just by looking around myself, where I live in Bosnia, I have never moved out. I've always been here, for the last 57 years. I look around and what do I see around me? That's a question. What do I hear? What do I see in the media? What do I see in the street? What do I see when I drive from Sarajevo, where I live, to Srebrenica, to the memorial? I work for the memorial. I drive back and forth very often. What do I see on that trip? About 140 kilometers, one way. I see denial in its visual manifestation. I see denial in its visual manifestation in different sort of iconography. There's sort of icons. There's pictures, photographs there's photographs of war criminals, in big format next to the road of Ratko Mladić himself, the war criminal, for example. There are graffitis. There are graffitis that Ratko Mladić is a hero. That Srebrenica will be repeated as a genocide, as a crime. Stuff like that. My colleague Haris Halilović says that when he has taken into account all these facts and analyzed them, he says we can call it an 11th stage of genocide, which is triumphalism. He calls it a triumphalism. You triumph over what has been done. So the question is, again, which I ask myself many times, if Bosnia is a post-war society, which is another question that I have never received a clear answer to. How many years should pass after a war ends for a country or society to be stopped? Referred to as a post-war society. And if Bosnia is a post-war society, the question is it also a post-genocide society? And when will it stop being a post-war and post-genocide society? In my opinion, not in just my opinion, many people will agree. I believe, the public discourse that the rhetoric that you can hear in the media and in social media, on TV, mainstream media, from Belgrade, from Banja Luka, to this very day, including open institutional denial, for example, by the institutions and the part of our country called Republika Srpska entity from Banja Luka, from which they say clearly, loud and clear, that a Srebrenica July 95 was not a genocide. This comes from the cabinet of the president of the entity of the Republika Srpska. It comes from the what they call the National Assembly or the Parliament of Republika Srpska. It comes from some ordinary people. It comes from the people, journalists, from TV, from newspapers, online. How do you say? Portals. You can see denial in all kind of different forms, with a very few exceptions. There is a very few exceptions where individuals of Serb ethnicity, which I believe takes a lot of courage to do. When you are surrounded by this sort of denialist rhetoric, which is institutionalized, it takes a lot of courage for these very few individuals. I'm talking about those who appear in the mainstream media. There are, I believe, many other individuals who probably do the same as they do, but there is very few of them who appear in the mainstream media of the Serb ethnicity, including some of the politicians, but very few, and they say that what happened in July 95 was a genocide. I don't know. I mean, if we speak of percentages or statistics, it's probably less than 1%, or 0.1% of individuals that I've so far heard of, acknowledged. They have acknowledged the fact that this was a genocide.
I can.
I'll just finish here. In my PhD, I also mentioned another phenomenon. It's a very complex phenomenon. It can be looked at from all kind of different angles. I'll just mention another one, which is, I think, very interesting. It is the silence. Because silence as a phenomenon that exists in public space, in the media and public space, should be seriously taken into account as a form of either denial or acknowledgement, or something in between, or neither of the two. And some of the scientists say and write, and I've quoted them, and I believe I've also written about it. I believe that what they say is very important, that sometimes silence in a society, for example, part of a Bosnian society, or part of Bosnia populated by the Serbs, because Bosnia has been, that part has been ethnically cleansed, and so it's now populated almost exclusively by the Serbs. There is a silence. So we're not talking about an open, straightforward denial. They're not saying every day in the street or in the media, Srebrenica was not a genocide. They're not saying that. You know, it's not like that. It's just, you know, silent. They're not talking about it. They are ignoring the fact. They are there completely, they tried to sweep it under the carpet. And that's what has been happening, in my opinion, for the last 30 years. Maybe more of a silence deep within what we may refer to as the Serb society in Bosnia and Herzegovina, rather than open denial.
Yeah, I was just to mention how recently they found remains of some of the Srebrenica genocide victims in the backyard of the local doctor, a medical doctor. He actually knowingly buried some of the remains of the people who were murdered in a genocide in his backyard. And when they asked him, he was basically trying to make it relative, right? Or like there was no real words of sorrow or any type of acknowledgement. So I hope you all understand to what level that goes. The local doctor buries in the secondary, grave, remains of the people who were murdered in a genocide. And you can Google it.
Mirsad, the location is Brčko, and that is 100 kilometers away from Srebrenica.
Almost like a trophy. That reminds me of a book by John Gross. If anybody, what you just mentioned, if anybody read it, Neighbors, about the city of Jawabne in Poland, which also have committed such horrific crime against the local Jewish people during the World War II. And when he visited the town, everybody is quiet. I really recommend the book. It's called Neighbors, right? And talks about it. Sorry, I jumped in again, Dr. Najla. I just couldn't resist to mention this doctor who was, for me, it was just beyond the pale, right? The medical doctor buries the remains 150 miles away of the two people in the secondary grave. That's beyond the pale.
Thank you all. I can just briefly speak to trauma or re-traumatization that comes from genocide denial in general, from my background in my field, working with survivors and people who've experienced all of this, having to hear, Hasan, as you mentioned, or see images right in front of you and continue to live in that context of the narrative of this did not happen to you, right? And all that is being communicated. It is very, very re-traumatizing, and it makes me think of, Hasan, as well, as you mentioned earlier, that sentiment of when does that region, or when does Srebrenica stop being, right, like that post-Srebrenica genocide life. And I know in my working with survivors, that is a deep desire, is for them to actually feel seen, for us to feel validated, right, for truth to be spoken around, and for people to finally feel that they can move forward in their healing, because that is what denial is doing for survivors. It is actually keeping them in the same exact state of pain. So I'll just add that. I would like to move us at this point towards our last question, considering our time today, and I would like to invite our participants here, all of you who have joined us today at the end, for questions or specific comments. But for our last question, I would like to start with Robert, if that's okay. In your perspective and opinion, what do you think the global community can do more effectively to combat genocide denial specifically, and to support justice efforts?
Well, thank you, Najla. As Hasan says, denial is very prominent, not only in in Bosnia and Serbia, but throughout the world. And he mentioned how can we forget? And when you consider that the Holocaust happened 80 years ago and there's denial of that going on, I don't think, it's only my opinion, that that denial will ever disappear. What's important is to do what Hasan and others are doing, and yourself, Dr. Najla and Mirsad, is to continue to talk about it. The most important people in this, in my opinion, are the witnesses like Hasan and yourself. But I think also, getting back to what I do, I've always been very conscious since I started volunteering for Remembering Srebrenica UK, that the forensic work that was done there isn't often talked about, and I feel very strongly that they can provide pretty substantial stories about challenging denial, and that's what I hope to do. In the UK, Remembering Srebrenica hold up to 800 events every year from volunteers in every country in the United Kingdom, but still people forget. If I can just mention that I watch the Prime Minister's questions in Parliament every week to keep up with what's going on here and mostly in America, and I noticed that politicians wear pins or badges on their lapels commemorating one event or another, and I'm pretty sure that on the 11th of July, many of them will be wearing Remembering Srebrenica pins, and a few politicians will comment on it. But the next day, they'll be wearing yet another commemorative badge or medal. And what is extremely frustrating is that, given that certainly in the United Kingdom, dozens, if not hundreds, of politicians have been invited to in delegations to Srebrenica to visit the Memorial Centre, to speak to the survivors and in the mothers of Srebrenica, and yet, since the terrible war in Ukraine began, I can hear some of those politicians commenting on the Ukraine war as being the first war in Europe since the World War II, and they've got a lot to remember. But it's frustrating for people that try to send that message. But it's also extremely hurtful to the Bosniaks who not only live in the UK, but for those who are aware of it in other parts. And it's not a deliberate thing. It's just a fact that people forget very quickly. But that's why it's so important that people continue to remember. And as you can see, I'm getting very old now, and I'm attempting to try and continue the work as long as possible. But it's important to hand over to younger people in order that they can continue that memory. And Hasan, I'm sure, will be doing the same. We've got to tell people about what's happening and educate people. And if only schools could put it on their curriculum, then that would make it a lot easier, because it's worth pointing out finally that as my understanding is that school kids in Serbia are taught an entirely different version of what happened in Bosnia, and I understand in Croatian schools. And so it's no surprise that you're creating another generation or more future generations of deniers. I'll pass it back to you, Dr. Najla.
Thank you very much, Robert. I would like to hear from others as well, Dr. Mirsad or Hasan, on this last question. How do we inspire the global community to combat genocide denial, before we take questions from our participants?
I'll leave it to Hasan.
Yeah, well, you mean genocide denial in general? or the Srebrenica Bosnian genocide denial. You probably mean the genocide denial in general. I mean, there are other genocides which must not be denied, and really we should work in some sort of coordination. I mean, there's a coordination, and there's already cooperation between different memorials in Europe, including the Srebrenica Genocide Memorial. And I think that's one of the best ways to work against the denial. For example, the Srebrenica Genocide Memorial has already established close cooperation, with the memorial in Auschwitz, in other places, in Poland, in Germany, in France, Austria, and some other memorials, not only in Europe, in South African Republic, for example, in Kigali, Rwanda, very close relationship with the survivors of the Rwandan genocide, and with other memorials, not necessarily those commemorating a genocide per se, and it is also another question whether the term genocide itself is in the core, or is a core of the problem of the genocide denial itself, because they're not only denying the legal, they're not only questioning the grounds or the legal grounds of the classification of the crime as genocide, as delivered or as defined in the judgments delivered by the tribunal in The Hague or the International Court of Justice. These are clearly judgments that classify the crime of July 95 as a genocide. Those denying or deniers, they're not denying just that legal grounds. They are denying that such a crime has never happened. That they would say no, they exaggerate, the number is exaggerated, and not that many people were killed. There are clear insulting messages in the media from politicians, including Milorad Dodik himself, who said several years ago that those Muslims who bury these he said coffins, or whatever he called it, they're empty. They bury empty coffins. And actually, in many cases, that's very close to the truth, because only a single bone is sometimes found. A single bone, piece of a leg, of human skeleton, and in many cases, the relatives are simply they have no choice but to agree to a procedure and the funeral, to lay these remains to rest. And so, these sort of perfidious messages are very painful. And as I'll finish here, so it's not just the problem of someone coming up potentially with counter arguments, which he or she should not do, because the court has already had its say, right? It's when a judgment is out, it's a binding judgment. It's an international. It's a case law. It's a case law, But it's not only that they deny the legal grounds. It's that they deny the facts that had already been established. Those that Robert and and his colleagues helped collect and record. And we talk about forensic evidence, and we talk about many other facts that are simply undeniable. undeniable. And the best way to combat denial, I believe, is to make these sort of facts available to the public. And this has been done, for example, by the whoever runs this website now, or the server where the documents are stored after the International Tribunal in The Hague has been closed down. You can still go through thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of documents stored in this database of the ICTY. Anyone can go there. Anyone can log in with a nickname and a password and log into this sort of public, database. It's a public database. So that's I think one of the ways to combat denial. Sorry, yeah, it was a bit too long. Sorry.
No, that's really valuable. Thank you. Thank you all so much, our participants, our panelists here, Robert McNeil, Dr. Mirsad, and Hasan Nuhanović, for sharing your time, your personal and professional experience and stories around this very touching and important topic. At this time, we would like to invite all of you as our participants here who have joined for any questions or comments that you might have.
As we wait, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I want to encourage everyone here to, ask any specific questions you have from any of us here that you would like more information on or would like to talk about.
I try to provide the links for these things that Hasan mentioned in the chat for this Zoom talk, so you can see for example, the website for ICTY. You can see the website that Mr. McNeil is the global ambassador. I also invite you to read their books. They're also valuable resources in this effort to deny genocide. Both books both by Hasan and by Robert. We have now one of the participants from Mine. She's a social anthropologist based in Turkey. She posted an interesting information in her in the group chat as well, and I hope everybody checks it up. Dr. Mine, if you would like to ask any question, you feel free to turn on your microphone and say it. Dr. Donovan, thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Donovan is a historian and also my colleague, and he recently started reading a book about Final Verdict, which I guess Hasan is familiar with, and he was by himself also quite taken back by what he read. So anybody wants to ask a question, please turn on your microphone, introduce yourself, and go ahead.
Hello, hi, I'm Avery. I'm from Florida. I want to thank everyone that, came here, that decided to share their story and give the information, because it's very heavy to learn about this. But a question that I wanted to ask, specifically for the book, was, does it have first-hand accounts, just yours? Like, what is basically in the book, like, besides your own information?
Both authors are welcome to answer.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. McNeil.
Yeah.
Maybe you can tell something about your book.
So I didn't quite hear the question. What was it?
The question asked was, Robert, does the book accounts for your personal, experiences, or is it technical? So I posted a link for for Mr. McNeil's book for those who are interested.
Yeah.
But it's basically what is the book about, and then after you, maybe Hasan can elaborate on his book.
Well, my book is based on a diary, a journal that I kept throughout my time working there, and it's based on my experience. It may not be historically accurate in terms of in a few ways, but as far as the forensic work is concerned, it does go into quite a lot of detail. But I felt that was important, just as I've said earlier, to demonstrate how meticulous the work was. And so I think that myself and many of my colleagues who went out there, it had such a profound effect on all of us that I felt it was important to talk about it, because I hadn't seen any other book specifically about the forensic work, although there are a number of books about the history of the war. And it's worth mentioning at this point too that my experience was mirrored by experts from over 32 countries worldwide. There were up to 300 individual experts went out there, mainly on a rotational basis, until the ICTY had finally closed and the residual mechanism for criminal tribunals had taken charge, as Hasan has alluded to, of that evidence. So it's basically just a personal document of what it meant for me personally, and to try as an attempt to, as the theme of this talk has been, to challenge denial.
Thank you, Mr. Robert. I also had a question for Mr. Hasan. I know you talked about seeing your family get killed, and I'm so sorry that happened, but I wanted to know if you learned something, quote unquote, or it's changed you in a way for the better, so to speak.
I didn't see my, thank you for the question. I didn't see my family being killed that day, but, they were, what I saw was how the Dutch UN soldiers and officers ordered my family to leave the United Nations compound, military base, basically, and walk out straight to the hands of the Serb soldiers who were standing at the gate. So that's what I saw. The hope that someone who has been registered as a missing person, which happens after these kind of events, and after the Bosnian War, we had almost 32,000 missing people in Bosnia and Herzegovina. From July 95 massacre, over 8,000 missing people, and the hope that exists for the survivors who hope that their missing relatives may turn up alive from somewhere does not disappear for years. For some of these mothers whose sons have been missing for 3 decades, for years, the hope has never vanished. And it happens in every war with the mothers whose sons are missing, either as it is called KIA, killed in action, as a soldier, or in this case, these were civilians. And basically what we're talking about are civilians that were taken away. They were imprisoned for a couple of days, and then they were taken to execution sites and killed. This was the 4th year of a war. The war started in 92, and we are talking about 95. And so it did not came by surprise. We already went through terrible events in 92 and 93 and 94 before July 95. So it was not, it was almost at the end of the war what happened in Srebrenica. So I already learned a lot from my wartime experience. It changed me forever. I was 24 when the war started. I just turned 24 actually. I was 23, but let's say 24, and I was 27 when Srebrenica happened. So yeah. Whether it changed, how it changed me, I cannot tell. I cannot really tell how my life would have looked like had I not been through this kind of experience. I wish I had never experienced this sort of history.
Thank you so much for your question. We are going to ask Alexandra, I believe it was.
Yeah. Yes, thank you so much.
And then we'll move on to the question in the chat. I'll give the mic over to Mr. Birch as well.
Thank you. I'm sorry to keep my camera off, but I'm kind of on the move. Thank you so much for sharing your, whether research, but also personal experiences. You've mentioned, I think, several times during this webinar that, we see other genocides happening right now as we speak. So I wonder, looking back at the last more than a year of what has been happening in Gaza, when was for you, whether from your experience in your research, but also from your personal experience, when was the moment when you kind of went into shock? Oh my God, it's happening again. Maybe on the human level, or you can go, into the more of like the formal stages where you saw that some of the first stages of genocide were happening. I think Gaza is a very specific example because, the genocide in Gaza, in my humble opinion, hasn't started after October 7th. There were other, I believe, some of the first stages of genocide unfolding, with the occupation and the displacement of the Palestinian population. But I wonder, how do you view what has been happening in Gaza or the Palestinian territories as such? It's not only Gaza, it's also the West Bank. How do you view that? And also maybe Dr. Hasan, is that post-traumatic for you because you have that personal experience and then you see something similar happening in the 21st century when we should have been already past that point of denial and silence? So I wonder what your thoughts are, and of course you can both share. And thank you again for today.
Okay, so maybe Robert or?
Yes, well, it's a good question, Alexandra. I naively believed after what had happened in Bosnia, especially given that the president of Serbia, Slobodan Milosevic, was arrested. He died during his trial, unfortunately, before they reached a verdict. But the other political and military leaders were found guilty of genocide. And I believed then, as I say, probably naively, that would surely send a message to other despots, were they to enact that or reenact that scenario. But of course, that's proven not to be the case in numerous cases since the 1990s, 2000s. As far as Gaza, what's happening there is concerned, people, and I'm putting on my forensic hat now, but people refer to what's happening in Gaza as a genocide, almost as if it's been proven already. And I would just add caution to that. It's clear that many crimes have been committed there, whether they're called crimes against humanity or whatever. But those crimes, including genocide alone is the most difficult crime to prove in a court, and that might explain perhaps why in Bosnia, Srebrenica and parts of in Sarajevo were regarded as a genocide, but there were thousands of other atrocities committed throughout the country, especially in areas such as Brčko, Prijedor, and many other, too many to mention, places. And I know that the survivors and the victims' families were disappointed when genocide wasn't proven in their cases, and that just underlines how genocide is such a difficult crime to prove in a court. But it's a personal opinion. I'm not very political, but I believe that serious crimes are being committed daily, not only in Gaza, but in Ukraine and Darfur and other parts of the world too. So that's my opinion. I have been involved in a group called Doctors Against Genocide based in Jordan, and been talking to them about how to gather evidence as best as possible about that. So I am very remotely involved in it. And I do believe that serious crimes are being committed. So I would pass that back to Hasan, if that's okay.
Yeah, I believe that this year is the 30th anniversary of the commemoration of the Srebrenica Genocide, the 30th commemoration actually, and there will be a series of events on this subject online, like this one, or in Sarajevo or some other locations in a formal conference. And I believe that the question of what is happening in Gaza is to be expected, and people do refer to it as a genocide. Many people do. I follow the events since day one. Basically, when I open my Twitter account or X account, the feed that I get, let's say 90% of the images that I get in my tweets are actually about Gaza. I mean, probably more than 90%, probably 5% about Bosnia. I don't know how this algorithm works, but what I'm getting on a daily basis are images of children torn into pieces and other, people and children torn into pieces in Gaza. So basically, I'm seeing these images every single day, because I do check my Twitter account every day. I asked myself a question many times over the last 18 months, what should I do? And I really don't know what I can do. And then I also thought, okay, this is how in July 95 somebody was sitting somewhere in front of his TV in America or Europe. They asked themselves the same question while the Srebrenica genocide was happening, and they said to themselves, well, there is nothing that I can do. These are my thoughts. I do listen or watch these discussions on TV in the mainstream media on Gaza and Israel and the West Bank, and I have followed several distinguished intellectuals, scholars who actually use the word genocide in reference to what's happening in Gaza, and they are all of Jewish origin. They're all of Jewish origin. It's Norman Finkelstein, Ilan Pape, Gabor Mate, Gideon Levy, and Omer Bartov. Omer Bartov is one of the most renowned genocide scholars who lives and works in the United States. However, let's imagine hypothetically that in 2002, when the court in The Hague judged or delivered its judgment in the case against the Bosnian Serb General Radislav Krstić, who was charged, among other things, for genocide in Srebrenica, let's hypothetically assume that this verdict did not include the count for genocide. What would have happened after that? What I want to say is that we felt deep, terrible pain and loss before the Krstić judgment in 2002, which was the first judgment on the Srebrenica genocide. And this pain, deep pain and loss, and emptiness, in our souls, and hopelessness did not change after this verdict. What we learned was that an international judicial body set up by United Nations called the ICTY decided that what happened in July 95 was a genocide. We did not say that. It was the court that said it was a genocide. And it is very difficult to prove a genocidal intent. Extremely difficult, and as Robert said, it is actually the most difficult crime that one can prove in a court of law, because the standards are very high. But I will finish with this sort of thought. What it says in the judgment, referring back to the Convention on Genocide Punishment, on Punishment and Prevention of the Crime of Genocide from 1948. So there's the convention that the judgments refer to. This convention says that a genocide is an act of that or this with an aim to destroy in whole or in part a group on ethnic, racial, national or other grounds. There's like 5 grounds mentioned, but the 2 key words are in whole or in part. And we have never received an answer if the perpetrators wanted to destroy us in whole or in part. Well, we knew it before the judgment came. I knew in 92 that the perpetrators wanted to destroy us. I felt it. I saw it around me. People were dying all over the place. And we were being chased from all sides across the Bosnian hills and valleys and mountains. We were running for our lives. I knew they wanted to kill us. Whether that meant that they wanted to destroy us in whole or in part did not even occur to me in my thinking. I maybe thought about it later after the judgment came from the ICTY. Even the judgment itself does not say if they want to destroy us in whole or in part. So what did this judgment tell us, or what did this judgment tell the rest of the world about what happened in July 95? We can all think about it, and let's see what happens with the case against Israel and the International Court of Justice when it comes. I will finish here with this thought. Sorry, I have talked at length this time. Well, I have lost the thread now. Yeah. I've been thinking deeply about the meaning of genocide convention and its applicability, its practical applicability. How do you practically apply genocide convention? Do you only apply it after the fact? Do you apply it while it is happening? And who can tell that a genocide is happening before the court rules on the case? So now the question is, not a question, I argue that once you decide that what is happening is a genocide and that therefore you should do something about it, it has already happened. It has already happened. So you can't wait for the genocide to happen before you decide to do something about it, because by that time it has already happened. And then we cannot speak about prevention.
Yes.
That's my thought about it. Yeah.
Thank you, Hasan. That's really important. Before we close today, I just wanted to go back to Mr. Birch. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, for your question, if you would like to ask as our last question today.
Sorry, apologies. I thought a written version would suffice, but I'll be happy to verbalize it. And first and foremost, thank you very much for the valuable information, and also thanks to the organizers, and special greetings to Professor Kriještorac. Mine is a methodological question. It's in the chat box for those who have already seen it. I missed the beginning stages of the session, so if this is covered, apologies for that as well. But don't you think that each stage of genocide is increasing the gravity of the crime exponentially? And if this understanding is correct, why do we define them as stages but not as exponents?
Interesting question. It's a methodological question. I think that will demand some serious answers, Mr. Birch. We appreciate you joining us today for the discussion, especially the fact that coming from the institution that we're talking about it. So I don't know, maybe Hasan, but briefly, because we have to round up. Do you understand? He's saying maybe we should think of denial as an exponent, not as a stage. In other words, it's essentially continuous, and it just
the genocide scholars, including Gregory Stanton himself, who came up with these 10 stages, actually say that a denial is happening, and not only as the last stage, which they call a last stage, but throughout all of the other stages, from the beginning till the end. And we talk, but let's stop here. We don't talk. Let's stop here. I'm just saying that a denial, when they kill 100 people behind the hill in 92, I mean, you can hear the shooting. I mean, the Germans in Buchenwald is the town where the Americans forced the mostly elderly men and women to actually carry the dead bodies of the Jewish victims in Buchenwald. There's a picture in color with General Patton, I think the American general, who ordered the German citizens of that town to come and see with their own eyes. He did that on purpose. He said, you have to come here, see it inside the camp, because it's like next to your homes. So tomorrow you can't say you didn't know. So they carried these dead bodies and basically loaded them onto the trucks. Did they know what happened behind the wall? Did they hear the shooting? Did they feel the smell? Did these people, the Serb people in the local villages where the Srebrenica victims were killed, did they hear the shots? Of course they did. Of course they did. They heard the shots. They knew what was happening. So basically, denial, is a part of the crime itself. It's part of the crime.
all right. So go ahead.
I think Dr. Mirsad, Robert just wanted to chime in briefly as we close and send it back to Dr. Sura.
Yeah, I'd just like to make a point about that's been made in that question, but also touch on what Hasan rightly mentioned about once it reaches genocide, then it's too late. It's happened. But the stages or exponents or ladder of prejudice, whatever you want to call it, in the early stages or the early parts of those. Of the ladder, if you like, that I call it, of prejudice, these are the warning signs when genocide can be stopped at any one of those stages. And that's, I think, important that, when it begins, I won't go through all of the stages, there's not enough time, but it's basically about singling out other people because they're different or whatever. And that's when the clear warning signs should be adhered to, and perhaps when there'll be a possibility for the increasing stages to come to an end. But if not, then it just increases and increases until it becomes a genocide, and therefore denial following triumphalness and what have you. So I'll just wanted to make that point.
Thank you, Robert. I appreciate that. At this time, I just want to again thank you all so much for joining us in this webinar, and a special thanks to our panelists here who've shared their time with us. I would like to send it off to Dr. Surova to close up for us.
Thank you very much. My name is Najla Surova, and as a serving director of Minority Issues Research Institute, I would like to thank to our speakers, Robert McNeil, Dr. Hasan Nuhanović, as well as Dr. Najla Hrustanović for moderating this seminar, and also to Mirsad Kriještorac, who is our senior researcher, for putting together this event, as well as to participants that have joined from different countries. And at the end, I would just like to emphasize again how it is important to speak about even about this horrible genocide in order to remember the victims, to honor them, to support survivors, to be solidar with them. But not only that, it is also very important to actively seek for the responsibility, not only criminal, but also political and moral, of all perpetrators, but not only them, but also of their supporters and enablers. And as before this seminar was shared, I come also from former Yugoslavia, Serbia, Vojvodina. I'm a member of Slovak national minority from there. And after the wars, I could not go back there, and we did not experience such a things as you. And this is very even traumatizing for me. So I really admire you all for your courage and willingness that you can talk about this thing and spread awareness that these things do not happen again, but as we see, they are happening all over again, all around the world. So thank you very much, and I hope for a better future for all of us. And as I'm saying, it is very important that all perpetrators be held account, because I was asking Mirsad before this event, like how, there were only few judgments, only few people get convicted. Dr. Nuhanović remembered Krstić, there were only several, but how do you kill 8,372 people in 3 days? How many people you need in reality on the ground? And where are those people? Yeah, where are those? Are they,
Neighborhood. They are in our neighborhood.
Exactly.
They'll be there until they pass away, or die of a natural cause. Basically, that's what's going to happen.
and this is that quest for justice that they all should bring to the to hold account for their acts. And this is how you can all, or we can all, move over if these people live with us, and how can they also live normally after what they did, or they are committing other crimes. But I overtook this place. I just there is still many things to be done, and I hope that you and others, we all together, we will have enough capacity and strength to continue working in this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Also want to thank all of you, and since we have here an international audience and I am joining us from United States, I have to say I'm proud of United States for its role in this story. This is the example of what the United States can do when it takes that high moral ground, right? Because they were perhaps the most active agent in discovering or unmasking of many elements of the crime, even though they came late, but nevertheless they came. And so I am proud to be in America for that reason. And we see how that looks like when America stands up to the expectations of the world, and what happens when it doesn't. So as I said, I'm proud of the role of the United States in that story. And hopefully we're gonna get back to that. And with that, I appreciate all of you again for joining us today. And I hope that we will continue these conversations in various forums. This is the 30 years anniversary. I appreciate all of you coming, and I appreciate especially Dr. Najla Hrustanović for moderating this to the best of her ability, with me constantly jumping in and doing my part, right?